Welcome back. We're on part 3 of Cinderella. Yes, this has been really fun. It's been a deep dive in a lot of ways into this story, which has so much power in terms of guiding us through our own inner transformations and speaking about how things can be different and how we can change our lives. Because many of us, if not most of us, have been taught that in order to change our lives, we need to take action outside. And what the story is showing is how, when we take action from an inner place and change what's happening inside, then that is reflected outside, and we see changes that are significantly different from the past. We break those patterns that we've inherited and been conditioned to believe are true parts of ourselves and true parts of the way the world works. We saw this with Cinderella when we talked about how that experience of being in the family with the stepsisters and the stepmother, in the way that they treated her, and really ultimately the father, because he was passive and didn't really help. And in some parts of the story, he actually contributes, and he's aligned with the stepmother and her view of his own daughter, and speaks of her in ways that are unkind. And so she would take that on as, this is who I am. Which, as a child, you don't have any way to discern that what the people around you are telling you isn't actually the truth. So you do believe it. You do take it in as, this is who I am, and this is what's true of the world and myself in the world. So Cinderella has to overcome that conditioning. And the story is taking us through, step by step, the process of how we actually do that in our own lives. So what happened last week is we talked about weaving the above and the below and the in and out. Remember, she goes up in the dovecote, she comes down out of the dovecote. She goes up in the tree, she's out of the tree. This weaving of above and below, and she's goes to the ball, she's out, and then she goes back home, goes to the ball, goes home. So this in and out. What's happening here is there's a weaving together of opposites. The below can indicate a couple of things. You could think of it as the unconscious, what's unconscious, coming to consciousness, or you can see it as the body and spirit, and the body being, or soul, because the soul inhabits the body. And that would be like coming into this place of the self and where you are, and this sense that like spirit is separate, right? Heaven is up there, earth is down here. And what we're doing is we're bringing the two together, right? In Christianity, they talk about the kingdom is at hand, and that has to be brought down in. We have often conditioned to believe that it's outside of ourselves, that you're not going to get there until you die. Like that, there's this division between these two things. And what's happening in terms of the consciousness of humanity changing is we are having to live this here and now, this consciousness that was described by Jesus. And so that's what the weaving is. It's the bringing that consciousness down into the body and actually living from that place. So the fairy tales are telling us, what are the qualities of this? We could take a quality that comes up a lot in this story, which is wholeness. And you could say that wholeness is a perception that would be from heaven. When these ideas of what it's like in heaven are actually the ideals of what we have to live here. So this idea is, when you're in heaven, you have everything that you need. And that's bringing that consciousness of wholeness back down into the body and living from that place. That would be uniting the above and the below. And then when you have that consciousness anchored in the body, what happens is then it's reflected in the world around you, and that brings the inner and the outer into alignment, and there becomes this transparency then between the inside and the outside, and there's no longer these divisions. And this is moving into a more unitary consciousness from a dualistic consciousness, which is what we're conditioned into. So their weaving is a uniting of the opposites, and Jung called it the transcendent function. And you have to sit there with the tension. It's often challenging because the conditioned mind says, yeah, we're not whole, we're lacking. That's a consumer society. We need more, we're not enough. And to sit in that polarity is challenging. And the idea is to sit in that tension and allow it to be there until Jung called it a transcendent third emerges. So something that has the capacity to pull it all together. And that's a more unitary perspective. That's the whole idea of the Trinity, which is the Father, the Mother, and the Child. So at the first ball, when that comes, the invitation comes, Cinderella asks if she can go, or asks her stepmother, and her stepmother says no. So she's asking for permission because this is the history. This is the way it's always been. The stepmother says no. She says, but because Cinderella cries and cries, she says, okay, if you complete these 2 tasks, then you can go. So Cinderella does exactly as she's asked, and she's still not allowed to go. So this we talked about represents a shift where she's moving from asking for permission to no longer asking for permission. This is the turning point where that begins to happen. She's taking her power back from the place that it's been projected. So what often happens is those childhood conditioned situations where you're conditioned, you have to ask your parents for permission, you have to ask your teacher for permission, you have to ask, if you work for a corporation or you work for someone else, you have to ask them for permission. Like there's this built-in belief that we have to ask an authority for permission. And here she's taking her power back, which is taking power back from not only the outer places that we've projected it, but also the inner places, because they can become an inner part of our psyche that we believe, like, if it's not happening, then I'm not being granted permission. So we see this turn where she's taking this power back from the place that it's been given away, which is the stepmother. So when the second and third ball comes, she doesn't even bother to ask, right? She's learning because she goes out to the tree and asks the tree. First, she asks the birds for help to separate the lentils and ash, and then she asks the tree for the dresses for the balls, and it comes. So this is building faith and trust in the universe, and in understanding that the power is in her to actually create her own life. So again, I know I keep saying this, but I find it so fascinating that the universe or the prince is not saving her. She can't unite with the prince if she's not in her power. It's not possible. It's absolutely not possible. And you'll see that as we go along. So she's learning to co-create with spirit, and to create something new. We can't look to the mind, which I've talked about, and we need to access that intuition, which we said was like the birds, right? Having to solve those tasks can be something that doesn't have precedence. Getting the dress for the ball doesn't have precedence, so she has to rely on another way of accessing information in order to move into a new level of consciousness. So this can trigger fear because it's the unknown. So when you're doing this in your own life, this is a space of not knowing, and it's not knowing how it's going to turn out. It's not knowing how it's going to get resolved. It's not knowing how the thing is going to come. And that can be a triggering experience, especially with a history like hers. So that fear is the same thing as holding those opposites, is sitting in that unknown and allowing that feeling to be there and allowing that to pass and then taking action at that point. So the shift here, which we again talked about last week, is from victim to consciousness. So now, where are we? At the third ball. She doesn't even bother to ask. She waits until they leave. She goes to the tree and gets the third dress, which is even more beautiful than the first two. What's interesting about that is it's like she's used to being this humble servant, you know, with the dirty clothes, sleeping on the hearth. And it's this real shift. Right here we see this big polarity. And each time she goes out, she's building strength, she's building faith, she's building trust. And there's this, she's allowing herself to be more. I'll let myself be even more visible by wearing a more beautiful dress, right? What a difference from her being on the hearth and considered, you know, embarrassing and not enough. And so she, each time she goes out, she lets a little bit more of herself be seen, which is very cool if you think about it. And so in our own movement into being more authentic, we can really notice, am I allowing myself to express more of myself? Each time I go out, am I allowing myself, in whatever way that looks like? It doesn't necessarily mean out in the world, but are you allowing more of yourself to be expressed in whatever way is your calling and your purpose and your function here in the emergence of this new consciousness? So the prince, again, only dances with her. And we talked about how critical this is to keep focused. Keep focused on why you're here, what you're meant to do, and not getting distracted by, when you're working with intuition, if you're really intuitive, then you're constantly getting ideas and you're constantly getting new projects and you're constantly getting like, and what can happen is you have like your fingers in a ton of different things going on, and it's very hard then to get things done because you don't follow through in that kind of like it can be fun at the beginning. Oh, great idea. Oh, this has got so much energy. And then when the energy begins to diminish as you start actually taking action step by step by step, then you can start to kind of get bored. You can lose interest. And the whole idea of the healthy masculine is he doesn't let you. He says, you know what? And this is your own inner masculine. It says, yo, this is the project right here. You started. Now let's move it through to completion. And then you can start the next project. So I have a file of ideas, and so I can keep focused on whatever I'm working on in the present moment. So that's that dedication and commitment and focus. The prince knows when the end of the ball comes, like he's learning, just like Cinderella learned from the fact that the stepmother first said you need to complete these tasks, and she did, and the stepmother still wouldn't let her go. The prince has learned now from the two previous balls that she's not going to let him take her home. The only reason that he can come up with a new response is because of the work that she just did. It's not like he's better than her. He's learned. This is a part of her consciousness. Oh, right. Okay, here's a pattern. Here's a situation. This is the way I normally act the previous two times, and now I need a new response. So what does he do? He has the steps of the castle covered in pitch so that when she runs away, her shoe gets stuck to the stair, and he now has a connection to her. Shoes come up in your dreams. As you're evolving consciousness, you will see this happen. They'll come up that you don't have your shoes, you can't find your shoes. There's a lot of shoes to choose from. So noticing over and over again, what would shoes represent? Possibly a couple of things. Of course, symbols are unique to each person. So if you have a dream and it's like, okay, here's your hat, here's your coat, here's your shoes, here's your thing. I mean, if it's like that, then it's not typically something to pay attention to. But if it's the only thing that's being paid attention to, If it's like nothing else is matter, you're all packed to go on a trip and you realize I don't have my shoes. I can't find my shoes. Then that would make it significant. What could it be? Having to do with standing in the world, having to do with moving forward in the world. What kind of shoes are they? What are they for? Are they familiar or unfamiliar? Are you in the process of trying on new things, new roles, new ways of being, new ways of moving forward? So it can almost be like a vehicle for moving in the world. Think of the Wizard of Oz, right? Dorothy had silver shoes, which of course not in the movie, but in the book she does. And it's very significant. It's very significant to the story. Silver being the feminine. So she's learning to walk in the feminine shoes on the golden path, which is the masculine world that we're living in right now, but not forever. It's changing and we're part of it. Yee-hoo. So then they get the shoe and he begins to go from house to house the next day with the shoe, trying the shoe on the young women in any household in order to find his bride. So they get to Cinderella's house, and of course they start with the first stepsister. The mother takes the shoe and the stepsister into another room, and the stepsister is trying to jam her foot in the shoe and she can't get it in because it's way too big. And warning, this is a little bit graphic, but the mother says, just cut off your toe and shove your foot in there. It doesn't matter because you don't need to stand on your own anyway. The prince is going to take care of you. So don't worry about it. So that's what happens. She shoves her foot in the shoe and the prince puts her on the horse with him and they start riding away and the birds come. There's blood on the shoe. There's blood on the shoe. This is not the real bride, right? So she's wearing white stockings and has red blood. Now, this is the stepsister, which we talked about in the very beginning, who had a black heart and a white face. So this we talked about as alchemical. Now, the first stage is black, the second stage is white, and the third stage is red. So here we have evidence that the third stage is happening, and the reddening represents embodiment. So there's a shift happening here from white stage as the intellectual, becoming aware, and then turning it into experience is the shift that we're making right now. So when the birds say that, the prince turns around, takes her back, says, do you have another daughter? Yes. So they get the other stepdaughter, take her into the other room, try and shove her foot in. Mother's like, can't get it in, way too big. Mother's like, cut off the heel. You don't need to worry about it. Just do it. Does it, shoves her foot in. What does this represent? This represents of a fear of being too much. Just cut away a little bit of yourself. Don't show too much. Don't be too much. Don't be too loud. Don't shine too bright. Don't think too much of yourself. Reduce. Get smaller. Be quieter, right? So the fear of being too much, coming out as too much, right? We talked about this polarity where she's the humble servant on the kitchen drudge, her father calls her, and then who's embarrassing to the family, to this brilliant star of the ball that only the prince will dance with. And now we're in this process of like, where's the middle? Where's this like place of coming in and rising above this polarity? And here we have it. Don't be too much. Cut it away. So when if she had to come out as herself, she would be worried about being too much, right? So she won't let the prince see all of her. Now we have this trying to come together. So a fear of being too much. The soul isn't ready to be seen, right? Because she's still hiding. It's almost like this is because all aspects are her, all these parts of the story are parts of her psyche. So this part of her, she's sending out the stepsister. She's not going out as herself. She's sending out the stepsister. So that means she's still, some part of her is still hiding. And the bird reveals the false bride, which is interesting because the bird were the ones who separated the lentils. The bird is the one who lives in the tree when she asks for the dresses. So this is an important function that this bird is playing, right? Of kind of helping, talking about the truth, taking her to a new place in consciousness. The stepmother saying you won't need to worry about it because you'll be taken care of means she's not standing in her power. So that's why this is like not a successful emergence. She has a fear of shining her light, sharing her gifts, being beautiful, being abundant. Like there's some place that's still being worked out inside of her, a fear of being seen completely. In the past, right? That was not safe. They made fun of her. They picked on her. They tormented her. So it meant ridicule and embarrassment in the past. So she's having to overcome these fears as she begins to emerge. This is an important part of the process in not rushing it, because it takes time and patience to keep going out. So this is like going to every ball is where she keeps going out and letting herself be more. Here, she keeps going out and coming back, going out and coming back. She's weaving this in, out, above, below, and facing her fears as she steps out of her comfort zone over and over again. It's like the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. You have to keep trying. You can't give up. The butterfly has to emerge on its own. You can't help it. I mean, there are stories about people who, I'm just going to help the butterfly come out. You can't. The butterfly actually won't survive if someone rips it open, if someone tries to help it spread out its wings. The only way it will survive and be able to fly is if it does it on its own, because it's building muscle it doesn't have. I've actually had a dream about this, where they were muscles that had never been used. So it was the process of learning how to use these muscles that had never been used, right? If you've been conditioned from your childhood to be a certain way, in this case, we're talking about Cinderella has been conditioned to victim consciousness. It's like there's this research they did with puppies or dogs where they called it, what did they call it? Learned helplessness, I think. And what they did was they had this puppy in a box. Of course, this doesn't sound too nice because, they give him a little shock. Nothing to hurt him, but just a little shock. And they, in the box was such that they couldn't get out. And then what they did was they lowered the one side of the box and gave the little shock. And the dog just sat there. It wouldn't jump out. It didn't know that it could, right? They have that same story with the elephant who they chain as a when it was a baby, and eventually like they go from the chain to a smaller chain to a smaller chain to a rope, and then essentially you barely need anything. It could be a thin rope because the elephant no longer tries to get away. It's conditioned that it can't. So with the dog, they had to actually lift it over and over again. Like, okay, this is the way. This is the way. This is the way to get, like, okay, and that's what's happening here in the story. So new muscles are being used, which represent new parts of the self. And so they're unfamiliar, and there's this movement towards learning how to use them. So the prince on the horse, a horse is a symbol of power, mobility in the world. And he represents that coming online now, right? Where she's on the horse with him. So her own masculine is coming into, and they're learning to work together, right? So the third, he comes back with the second sister. And the third time, he says, do you have anybody else? No, we don't have anybody else. We only have this kitchen drudge, her father says. He says, well, I want to see her. And they're like, you don't want to see her. She's just dirty and yada, yada, yada. You know, I want to see her. What's so important about this is where they're challenging, again, the parental consciousness, the inherited conditioned response. So she has to They have to ignore. That's not the power anymore. That voice in the head, it's getting neutralized, right? So he says, I don't care. Bring her out. I want to try the shoe on her. Parents are like, she's not enough. The inner voices of the past. Not enough, not enough, not enough. And he says, I don't care. Send her out anyway. She puts the shoe on. It fits perfectly. Perfectly. The shoe fits. The one who the shoe fits will become the bride. I love that. I just love that phrase. The one who the shoe fits. So he sees her then. He recognizes her. Oh, this is the one. I see it now. Right? She has to be equal. The other two weren't equal. The stepsisters were not equal. And that is why he didn't end up with them. He came back because they weren't on an equal footing, right? The mother, you don't need to be like able to stand on your own. Yes, you do. You do. You can't listen to her. So she has to be as equal in order to unite with the new masculine consciousness in her. She has to be able to stand on her own. She has to believe that she's equal. She has to feel free and she has to feel safe to be herself. No more cutting away. No more playing small. No more being silent. She has to stand in her power. She has to let her light shine. She has to be her full potential and ignore the parental voices. Ignore the voice that says not enough, you're going to be embarrassed, this is not good, step back, keep going. It's the butterfly. You're building new muscle, you're getting stronger, you have to keep going. When the shoe fits, nothing is cut away. Nothing. They ride away on the horse. The doves land on each shoulder, which is cool, like, right? There's this balance now, this unity of the opposites. And they peck out the sister's eyes. I know that's kind of graphic. So what does it symbolize? The judgmental parts of her are like rendered unable to judge. And now they're inner directed as opposed to outer directed. So it kind of renders them neutral. It neutralizes them. So now in unitary consciousness, there's nothing to defend and protect, right? They leave the parent's consciousness. That was where she had to defend and protect herself. Remember, when she's at the castle, she didn't. She didn't need to. She could let herself shine and be the star of the show. And she didn't need to protect and defend herself. She was safe there. So she's not going to have to do that anymore. She can live in wholeness from her inner truth. And that's the only way she could have moved into the castle, which represents the new state of consciousness. In a new state of consciousness, we have a new role in the world. And that's what she does, right? She's demonstrating for us how to shift out of the old consciousness, the victim consciousness, into the creator consciousness. She did it through working with the birds. The outer now reflects the inner, right? So the movement into a new place represents the movement into a new consciousness. She's in her power, and that means that at some point she becomes the queen with heart. Because remember, the stepsisters had to transform that. That was what they were carrying. That was the projected part of her, that they had the closed hearts. So in this place, there's this reconnection. If you remember at the very beginning, what did we talk about was the mother. That there was this disconnection because the good mother had died. The mother represents the first chakra, which is red. And that is about abundance. It's about safety. It's about groundedness, like being in the world. And that represents kind of like a coming together of in a wholeness. and wholeness embodied. And so it's as though the good mother comes back. That it's kind of this incorporated thing, that kind of the mother, not the little personal mother, but the greater mother is what's being connected to here as an embodied experience, an embodied present, which is why it was out in, out in, out in, was because there was this movement to embody this new state of consciousness with the mother represents. So of course they live happily ever after. Yes, yes, yes. All is well in the world. So I hope that helps you on your journey. I find it fascinating. I find it personally very helpful and just so applicable to anyone's life. Like when my clients come, it's like, okay, so this is like with Cinderella when blah, 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 blah. So it really gives us a map to help us transition into being ourselves and who we are, and understanding why we're here and actually taking action towards those things. So my intuition, my guides, whatever, something told me to read a poem this week, and I would like to share Whispering Moon because it seems connected to the story. This is in The Courage to Speak, my book, which you can get at Amazon. I think I have some copies on Etsy too. No, I don't. Yeah, it's just Amazon. Deep within the darkness of night, the moon was heard whispering softly aflight into the ears of her daughters and sons to awaken them gently and guide them, move on. Wake up, my children, from what you have been. The time is now. Don't ask about when. The life you asked for has now come to be, the one in which you're happy and free. The breath is released, your feet on the floor. Walk away from the past, you're so much more. Listen, my children, to what I will say. There's one path to freedom and no other way. Close your eyes to the world, look deeply within. Then follow the trail to where you begin. Then trace it even further to before even then, to see what you were before there was when. Wake up, my little children, to who you really are. The love is inside you, and you are light like a star. I love that one too. That's one of my favorites. I have a lot of favorites for sure, in addition to the fairy tales. A lot of favorite poems as well. But thank you for joining me on another Saturday. I would tell you what we're working on next week, but I haven't completely decided yet. I have between two things. One is to start The Handless Maiden, which is an amazing story. It's so cool. It has, like Beauty and the Beast, it has more of the masculine and kind of the interaction. Like with Cinderella, there's not a lot really with the interaction between the masculine and the feminine. And so The Handless Maiden has a little bit more of a full kind of a depiction, let's say, of the king in this story. So that's an interesting one. But then there's kind of a theme that I was thinking of exploring as well, which is kind of across stories. So it will be a surprise. I'll have to wait to see what I'm guided to share. Anyway, I hope you have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed Cinderella and you're as impressed as her and you're totally convinced that, yes, in fact, she is empowered and she's not a victim waiting, that she did all this hard work. She did the work. She did it. Yes, and so are you. You're the one doing the work in your own life, right? No one's doing it for you. So, okay. Great to see you. Take care, and I will see you next Saturday.